Greetings, everyone. My name is Beatrice, and welcome to another episode of Voices of ASEAN. Today, in line with our partnership with the Dubai Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we are continuing with our series of interviews with distinguished speakers at the Global Business Forum ASEAN, which is taking place in Dubai in early December. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Brian Shegar, the founder and president of the UAE-Singapore Business Council. Dr. Shegar has over 40 years of experience in international banking, including setting up and running the Asia Pacific office of Emirates NBD, the largest bank in the UAE. He later set up ME Asia Private Limited to help Asian businesses build connections in the Middle East, and he founded the UAE-Singapore Business Council to promote, support, and enhance trade and investments between UAE and Singapore. Dr. Brian will be speaking on the challenges the business community faces as it seeks to strengthen business ties between ASEAN and the UAE. And today, he will elaborate on just that. So joining me live from the United Kingdom, here is Dr. Brian Shegar. Hello, Dr. Shegar.
Hello, Beatrice, and
So
good
pleased to have
afternoon.
you. So pleased to
Good
have you with
afternoon
us.
to you.
And how's London
Thank
right
you.
now? Is it dreary as usual?
Yeah, London is rather dreary, I must tell you, particularly this morning, because there's talk that there might even be snow very prematurely in this
Oh,
weekend.
oh no.
I don't see any evidence of the sun
Oh
next to
dear.
my on my window, but that is London. It's good fun. My kids are here.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't seen them for 2 years. So my wife and I thought it's a long overdue to come and see what they're up to
Well,
and
that'll be fun.
reconnect.
So now that you've had so much fun with your children, I think you're leaving for Dubai in about a week's time for
That's
work.
right. I'll be going to Dubai on the 5th of December
Mhm,
to participate in the Global Business Forum ASEAN, which is organized by the Dubai Chamber.
mhm,
And so I'll be there at the expo itself for a few days, and then
mhm,
subsequently I'm going to stay on in the
mm,
UAE, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai
mhm.
to sort of catch up with
Yeah.
contacts of mine and also with other friends and important people I have to meet, because
Yeah.
next year the Business Council is going to be organizing a number of very important trips, business
Mm,
delegations actually,
mm.
in conjunction with the Expo 2020,
Yeah.
particularly
You've
during
had
the
a
first
long
quarter.
career
Yeah.
involvement with the Gulf region, Dr. Shegar. You have been establishing and running Emirates NBD Group in the Asia Pacific, and you formed the Singapore Business Council in 2018, the UAE Singapore Business Council in 2018. After all this involvement, can you tell us a little bit about it? What led you to form the council, and what have been the milestones of the organization since then?
Well, thank you very much, Beatrice. I mean, that's a very, I suppose, mood question you're asking me. And if I give you some context, as the CEO of a bank, I've always felt it was incumbent for me to be part of the business community, particularly in relation to the nationality of the bank in which I represent in the
Mm-hmm.
region. For example, I was head of Midland Bank in Southeast Asia, which is an English bank. And during that period, I was in the exco of the British Business Association, which
Mm-hmm.
morphed into the British Business Chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also in the committee of the Indonesian Business Association of Singapore, because Indonesia is a very important country for banks in Singapore, because they are the biggest offshore market for
Mm-hmm.
banks in Singapore. And subsequently, I set up a bank called NetBank.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was the founding vice president of the South African Singapore Business
Mm-hmm.
Association. And I ran NetBank covering Southeast Asia and South Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said in your very
Did
kind
you say South
introduction,
Africa, Dr. Shegar?
yeah, South African, one of the largest banks in South Africa,
Okay.
and they wanted to open in Southeast Asia,
Mm.
and they asked me to set up the business covering both South Asia and Southeast Asia,
Mm,
and
I
and
see.
and yes, I had also the distinct uh, privilege, you could say, of establishing from scratch two banks, NetBank, and subsequently Emirates NBD, Emirates Bank, which is one of the top
Wow.
banks in the UAE and the largest in Dubai.
I don't think I've
So,
ever met anyone who set up a bank from scratch, ever.
well,
This is my first.
well, I guess, well, you're right in the sense that I consider it to be, fortunate perhaps,
Yeah.
and highly was very rewarding in terms of my exposure and my experience in setting up a bank from scratch. So a regional office in Singapore is a microcosm of you could say the head office, wherever the head office is, and so it was a very enlightening and rewarding experience. And so, just to answer your question, so when I set up Emirates NBD, I also got obviously immersed in the community, i.e., the companies that are involved in the UAE Singapore business nexus. And then I was invited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the signing of the GCC FTA, Singapore FTA, the GC Singapore signed an FTA. And this was a momentous event because it was the first FTA that was signed by the GCC with a country in Asia. And at that conference, I represented the business community and I spoke about ASEAN GCC business relationships and trade flows and investment flows. And then I said, yes, it's great to have an FTA on a G2G level, but what is important is to have a platform connecting the business communities. And that's when I suggested we should set up a UAE-Singapore Business Council or Business Chamber to facilitate that kind of connectivity. And that was the first sort of idea that I recommended to make the FTA really effective. So we set it up in 2018. I had the close cooperation of the UAE ambassador in Singapore, Dr. Muhammad Faqih, very erudite man, who was head of the Abu Dhabi Chamber, who was secretary of the Department of Finance, and together with the support of the Singapore authorities like the MTI, the MFA, ESG, and the equivalent in the UAE, we launched it in 2018. We have very good patrons. I mentioned the ambassador, the UAE ambassador is a patron, a former senior minister of trade and industry, Mr. Lee Shen, is a patron, and we also have His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al Nawami from the UAE itself, who's a patron. And our EXCO members are representative of all the large UAE companies that are operating in Singapore, as well as large Singapore companies who are operating in the UAE. And I can just name a few if you wish. For example, Danata from the UAE, the two banks, FAB and Emirates NBD, ENOC, IFCO, Global Foundries, a huge global wafer production company. And then from Singapore, we have DBS, Bank of Singapore, we have DP Architects, a number of other companies like Olam, who are in the EXCO, representing many sectors of the economy. We're very active. We organize a lot of activities. We have an activity a month, and I would say we're one of the more active business chambers. We have all kinds of these kinds of activities to foster better understanding of the opportunities there. And these would be webinars, monthly talks, business delegations, networking events with other trade associations and chambers, and that keeps us very busy. Now you talked about milestones.
Yeah.
If I can sort of recollect some of the milestones, which I think I may want to share with you, one of these milestones must be the visit of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in February 2019. Because when he came to Singapore, he signed the Singapore UAE Comprehensive Partnership, which is the first ever signed between the UAE and an ASEAN country. And during that joint declaration that was read out at that important event, we were mentioned. This UAE-Singapore Business Council was mentioned as the main conduit for the B2B linkages to be encouraged and enhanced and promoted. So that was certainly an important milestone. Then the following year, 2019, we organized our maiden business delegation to the UAE, working with the Franchising Licensing Association of Singapore, covering F&B, education, retail sectors. And then late 2019, we actually laid the foundations for the 5 business delegations from Singapore to go to UAE for the expo last year, supposedly last year.
Yeah.
But as you know, that got postponed. And so now we are resurrecting those delegations, which will happen in the first quarter of next year.
Yeah.
And that's going to be very important because they're going to be part of
How sweet.
the expo. They're
Yeah.
going to be visiting people in Abu Dhabi and Dubai,
How's
and
the
really
business
come up.
environment like that, Dr. Shegar? I mean,
Well,
how
in Singapore or the UAE?
in
You're
the
talking
UAE?
about
I mean, is it
Singapore.
easy access for Singaporeans or ASEANs in general to go and set up business in the UAE? Um,
Oh,
how is it?
absolutely. The UAE has absolutely been very committed
Mm-hmm.
to creating a very investor-friendly climate, increasingly so over the recent past, because they have, in fact, liberalized even further. For example, the 100% ownership uh, um, 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 facility that's now available for companies that want to set up in UAE for the domestic business.
I see.
Hitherto, there was a need to have a local partner and to have a local majority ownership. Now that's been lifted in nearly most sectors.
I
So
see.
there is always this very friendly approach that the UAE has taken towards attracting global companies in setting up in the UAE, and they do it in the various Emirates, particularly Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They also have free zones that are particularly useful if you want to use the UAE as a base for the region.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the themes that I'll be talking about and today and also when I go to Dubai for the conference is how the UAE is a gateway, a natural hub and gateway for the broader region, which is quite a large region, Beatrice. It's not just GCC. You really, from the UAE, you can operate and cover Africa,
Yeah.
Eastern Europe,
Yep.
Central Asia,
Yep.
and thanks to Emirates Airlines, which has a excellent network of routes that bring you nearly everywhere in the world, you have this tremendous connectivity that the UAE offers.
Yeah.
Emirates, by the way, is the largest international airline now.
Mm.
Now, look, there was COVID, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking about pre-COVID, and then this great disruption caused by COVID, and now we are emerging out of COVID. So this seminar in the UAE on ASEAN, your conversation with me, I think are part of that emerging process, which has to happen. And I'm so happy that it is happening. The VTL between Singapore and the UAE has been established. And that would mean that people from Singapore can go to the UAE for these business meetings and business allocation and come back and not be quarantined. Now
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
a big opening,
Yeah. That's the
and
best
and
part
so
for me so far.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
No
so there
quarantine.
you are. So I'm very optimistic that the countries of the world and close trading partners such as ASEAN and GCC countries and Singapore and the UAE are going to now accelerate this process of
Fantastic.
engagement.
Is it fast? I mean, do you, let's say me, I want to go and start a business there, or just register a company. Would you do that like within a few days, or does it take? Is there a lot of bureaucratic red
No,
tape or nothing?
well, not, in fact, it's very fast,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
and there are some of these free zones like Jebel Ali in Dubai and Kizad in Abu Dhabi that are particularly set up to facilitate foreign companies opening up. So the whole infrastructure in terms of physical infrastructure, the process of opening up in terms of licenses can be done within a couple of days, 3 days maximum. I would
Wow.
say that it is certainly one of the most uh, you know uh, easy places to do business and to get people to employ people in the UAE is also relatively easy. They have been very open towards foreigners working in the country. As you know, of the population of 10 million people, only 20% are local, Emiratis, and the rest are foreigners. And they occupy all kinds of positions, from CEO positions, mid level, from blue-collar workers, and so on and so forth, service industry. But there is this acceptance in the UAE that they have to be open in terms of allowing people from all over the world to come and work there in order for them to achieve the economic and business objectives of increasing FDI and encouraging global companies to set up their regional operations there. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very easy to do business there.
Sounds very
I mean, the
intriguing.
challenges of doing business,
Yeah.
Beatrice, everywhere in terms of the business challenges
Yeah,
have got to be factored in. There's competition.
of course.
Like there's competition in Singapore, Malaysia, and most
Yes.
countries.
Of course.
In the UAE, be ready for competition because many companies are making a beeline there towards that place, towards the UAE as a place to do business locally and regionally. And so there will be competition. It's not like, some of the frontier countries, if they call them in certain regions,
Yeah.
where the competition is less.
Yeah, of course. Of course. But then your opportunities are even more. As much as challenges you have for competition,
Right.
the opportunities are also
Very
you know,
true. And
very
there are a
much more.
number of reasons why the opportunities are more. One, of course, I explained to you earlier on, the environment. Two, don't forget, it's a very wealthy region.
Yeah.
And the UAE is a wealthy country. It has oil and gas.
Mm.
It is a country which is blessed with oil and gas, mainly in Abu Dhabi, of course, but it's also equally blessed by a very strong services sector in Dubai. So if you look at the UAE within the GCC context, oil and gas is only 30% of the economy
Yeah.
because of the diversity of the economy. You have banking, finance, tourism, services, trade, commerce, and yes, it also has the wealth created by being blessed with oil and gas. And so it's quite unique, the UAE in terms of its very diversified economy.
What would you say would be the biggest business there? I mean, besides oil and gas, what do they export, or what would be the biggest contributor to the GDP next to oil and gas in the UAE?
If you look at the export sector, obviously oil and oil products. We got oil, crude oil, and then this crude oil is processed in the downstream side into refined oil products, and then further processed into petrochemicals. So oil products and petrochemicals are a major component of the export. But they also have aluminium. Is one of the big producers of aluminium. It's cheap energy and raw material availability. They also export food from their food manufacturing facilities that are in the free zones, and services. Services is a big part of the UAE economy. Like Singapore is a service sector, services economy. The UAE, thanks to Dubai, has very strong services it offers for the region, and that is a major area. Tourism is an big income earner.
I see.
The FMCG market is an important sector. So as I said, it's got one of the most diversified economies within that part of the world.
As you say, it's a gateway to the rest of the GCC, North America, and Central Asia. So services, as in when it's used as a gateway, the services that go alongside that usage. That's what you mean by services?
Absolutely. Let's look at banking. I mean, it is the most important banking center in that region.
Yeah, right? I get you now. Yeah.
In Dubai, there's the DIFC, which is the Dubai International Financial Center. In Abu Dhabi, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. Then let's look at the port part. The Jebel Ali port is the biggest port in the Middle East, one of the biggest ports in the world. It's the largest transshipment center in the whole of the Middle East.
Yeah.
And it has got tremendous connectivity. I talked to you earlier on about Emirates Airlines and the connectivity of Emirates Airlines in that whole region and in the world, in fact, and the cargo that comes with it.
You're right.
So you have tremendous connectivity, you see, and connectivity is critical for a country to emerge as a gateway to a broader hinterland.
Yeah.
And that global connectivity that the UAE has, I suppose the best equivalent in this our part of the world in ASEAN would be Singapore.
Yeah.
But Singapore doesn't have the natural resource of oil and gas that
That's right.
UAE has as well.
We've done
So,
really well
so
without that.
yeah, yeah. So they're quite blessed in that sense,
Yeah.
in having natural resources in oil and gas. So they have
Yeah.
deep pockets, particularly in Abu Dhabi,
Yeah.
to invest and
Mm.
invest in infrastructure, first world infrastructure, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, you can see it. It's so visible, the roads,
I can't wait. Another
yeah,
another 1.5
absolutely, the
weeks I'm
airport.
there.
Yeah, you'll be there, and then you can see
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yeah.
It is a highly cosmopolitan and highly urbanized place in terms of the main cities, for example, of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, are very, very urbanized. Look at the skyline. I mean, it's quite amazing. They have the tallest building in the world and so on and so forth. And the convenience, the ease of doing business in terms of logistics is very, very established
Yeah.
and attractive for companies to go and set up operations there. You know, the Middle East is an important region for business.
It's a very futuristic country, isn't it?
It is futuristic in the sense that they have the money to invest in cutting edge technology. They also have the money to invest in very ambitious technological programs and plans. You know, they sent a probe, satellite probe to Mars recently, and you'll be impressed. The majority of the people in that program were women. It was led by a lady, Emirati lady, and they have a ministry of artificial intelligence, a minister who's in charge of artificial intelligence. So the IT sector is an extremely important sector for them. And IT is very broad and generic. So within IT, you know, you can talk about the artificial intelligence, robotics, agri-tech, very important because food sufficiency, self-sufficiency becoming increasingly an important objective in the national economic agenda. And you know, so health tech, med tech, all these sectors are you know, data analytics, the whole gamut, you could say, of IT within that umbrella of IT are very much targeted by the government in terms of investments and encouragement for companies. Let's say, for example, you have a company in Malaysia or Singapore that has a unique technology. Now, my recommendation to them, when they would really have to consider going to the UAE and marketing that technology, because they'll find a receptive audience there. Because the UAE is very open to cutting edge technology from other countries to be imported there, to be applied there, and to be, in fact, made available in the whole region out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, out of the UAE, basically. So technology is important and a key area for growth. Absolutely.
Yeah. Exciting. Now let's come back to Singapore. The UAE is Singapore's largest trading partner and investment destination in the Middle East and North Africa. And in 2020, bilateral trade amounted to 12.8 billion Singapore dollars. Now, aside from the benefits to the two countries, Dr. Shegar, how has strong UAE-Singapore ties helped open the door to ASEAN for UAE businesses?
Well, I think that's very, again, very pertinent question, Beatrice. The two countries are gateways. They are natural gateways. And very much, as you have explained, the two countries also are close business partners in their own right. So two-way trade last year was about $13 billion. Investments into Singapore from the UAE is the highest from vis-a-vis ASEAN countries. Nearly about, I would say, as much as over $12 billion of investments have come into Singapore. And also investments into the UAE from Singapore are substantial. So if you look at ASEAN countries and you look at the stock of investments into the UAE, Singapore is clearly number one. I mean, recently, GIC, which is one of our sovereign wealth funds, invested $500 million in this $27 billion ADNOC pipeline project.
Mm.
I mean, that was a huge investment. And I talked to you about Global Foundries earlier on, who
Yeah.
are I'm the president, the vice president of the Business Council is Global Foundries, which is owned by Mubadala. Mubadala is one of the sovereign wealth funds of Abu Dhabi. And they have invested about 5 billion, they're investing another 5 billion in Singapore to expand their wafer fabrication plant. You know, there's a great demand for semiconductors. And just examples of some of the chunky investment flows. Trade flows is also growing by the day. I mean, COVID-19 was a bit of a disruption. 2019 and higher trade flows in 2020, you know, but it'll come back. And it'll, I think, come back with a vengeance, because people have been hunkering down for the past 12 months. And now they're just dying to go back to the, to normal business. And there is pent-up demand. And this pent-up demand will have to materialize. And that will materialize. There will be some changes, you know, I can talk about that if you like. The post-COVID economy is not going to be the same as the pre-COVID economy. Certain very important facets of the economy are going to change. And that is good. And that is natural. Change is a very natural, highly natural phenomena. And the sooner we accept change and adapt to these changes and benefit, then we will benefit and we will be able to survive. So companies have got to be now quick-witted. They have to be flexible. They have to look at new markets. They have to be responsive. And I think the future certainly does look promising, because there is this real desire to come back to normal business as usual, status.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Shegar, you'll be speaking on the topic leveraging hubs, the UAE-Singapore dialogue during the Global Business Forum ASEAN 2021, which will touch on how Singapore and UAE can learn from each other's experiences in combating the pandemic. Could you share with our viewers a brief highlight of your presentation, and what do you hope people will take away from it?
Well, okay. I mean, my presentation will cover certain broad areas. It'll be really the following, if I can sort of briefly summarize the areas that I would like to cover. I want to first of all put in context the significance of the GCC. The GCC, which is the primary hinterland of the UAE, is one of the most important regions in the world.
Okay.
50% of the energy requirement in ASEAN come from that part of the world. For the whole of Asia, it could be as high as 70.
Okay.
So it is a major provider of energy to Asia and to ASEAN. Saudi, followed by UAE, are the biggest exporters of oil to ASEAN. Saudi is number one.
Okay.
UAE is number two. Now, with this oil wealth and with this important nexus based on energy, which is a crucial part of economic activity, energy, there has been other spin-offs, right? And other sort of possibilities for business. Because with the wealth generated from oil and gas, these countries are able to invest in economic development, infrastructure development. And that will lead to, therefore, opportunities for companies in ASEAN to be part of that process in terms of infrastructure development, providing services as contractors, engineers, designers. Also in terms of investing in providing the consumer needs of an increasing number of population, both local and expatriate, and their demands. And also in terms of really other trade flows that are natural consequences as a result of economic development in different sectors. I talked about IT earlier on just now. Manufacturing is another area where where all the GCC countries, particularly UAE and Saudi, are going to be putting a lot of emphasis because they want to diversify from oil and gas.
Yeah.
All the countries there.
Yeah.
UAE is the most diversified, but Saudi wants to do the same too.
Mm.
And therefore, they will be creating incentives for people to invest in the manufacturing sector, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
GCC is an important economic bloc, and the GCC has invested, countries in the GCC like the Saudis and the Emirati oil companies have invested in Malaysia, in Pengaran.
Mm.
You have a huge petrochemical, a huge petroleum refinery and logistics hub. Also in Indonesia,
Mm-hmm.
there's investment from both ADNOC and Saudi Aramco and the broader Asian region. So there's downstream investment going on as well now, apart from the trading relationship in oil and gas, in the oil and gas sector. Now, so that's like the bedrock, you could say,
Yeah.
Trading in oil and gas, followed
Yeah.
by downstream investments, and then all the other trade flows that come with it.
Yeah.
Logistics is another part of this oil and gas industry. You must also bear in mind that the UAE is very actively involved in logistics in the oil and gas industry. Is a very important part of that business. So I'm talking about GCC, right? So GCC, important, hinterland, and I'm going to talk about that. Then I'm going to talk about ASEAN.
Mm.
Now, the economy of ASEAN GDP is about 3 trillion.
Yeah.
It's a huge economy. And once the sort of ASEAN Economic Community evolves into one big common market, it'll be the fourth largest market in the world.
Yeah.
It is a huge market in its own right. So I'm going to talk about ASEAN too.
Yeah.
And the ASEAN region is one of the most dynamic regions, economic regions. I mean, all the countries really. Indonesia, the largest economy, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, of course, Thailand, Philippines is a major exporter of people all over the world and earns a lot of foreign currency remittances.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the emerging countries of Myanmar and Cambodia and Laos, which also offer opportunities as they develop their economies.
Yeah.
But these, the original five in ASEAN are established emerging, they're established economies.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are attractions for ASEAN and as an important economic grouping and for greater engagement between the two regions.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm going to talk about the UAE as a hub, as a gateway towards ASEAN. Towards GCC, I mean.
GCC.
And conversely, I'm going to talk about Singapore as a gateway and hub for ASEAN. These two countries are natural hubs. I've explained to you earlier on.
Yep.
They have established themselves and proven themselves to be an effective hub. It's not a new proposition.
Yeah.
I mean, Singapore, you would know, in terms of foreign trade over GDP, is the highest in the world.
Yeah.
It's nearly 300%. That means it's probably the most open economy in the world.
Yeah.
That's the ratio that's used to define the openness of the economy.
Yep.
And then I talked about, the hub in terms of airline connectivity, port connectivity. These are all part of the process, right?
Yeah.
So the two countries, the role that Singapore plays, the UAE plays as a hub, is a very important part of my, you could say, presentation and discussion. And then I'll talk about COVID, because COVID is an interesting phenomenon. Yeah, it's been very, very sad in terms of the impact on the economy, on livelihoods, on, there have been deaths, there have been all kinds of disruption. But it has also been an agent of change. It has been an agent of, in fact, accelerating that change process. And the dynamics that have evolved out of COVID are really very interesting, because I'll give you some examples. In the past, globalization was the theme, right? Looking at the cheapest place to manufacture and source from, the cheapest place, and looking at quick delivery of the supply chain constituents. But no one talked about vulnerabilities of being dependent on one particular market to source your essential medical supplies, or food supplies, or the essential intermediate products in your production process. When you produce something, you use intermediate goods to put it together to produce a final product. Now, COVID has changed the whole lens of looking at these vulnerabilities and these configurations. I can maybe give you an analogy of what happened during the global financial crisis. During the global financial crisis, you remember, banks went through hell.
Mm.
There was near financial meltdown, if you remember. And then what happened? All the banks had to look at the balance sheet and stress test the balance sheet. So that, and then have more capital, which is risk weighted. Now, this is what is happening in the supply chain sort of dimension with COVID. The whole supply chain is being re-examined. And what will happen is there'll be reconfiguration. There'll be more regionalization and globalization. People want to source from nearer countries where they want to have diversified sources. They will have to do that. Every company will have to look at the supply chain very carefully, stress test that supply chain, and see where the vulnerabilities are. I mean, Singapore has announced that it wants to be 30% self-sufficient in food in by 2030 or something around that time. And that's not the only country, because vulnerabilities in supply chain in importation of food has been a factor.
Yeah.
And I'm just giving you examples, there have been so many other areas I can give you anecdotes about in terms of supply chain vulnerabilities and how, COVID has exposed these things and how companies now are re-examining that, how they structure the offshore manufacturing, where do they go to? Do they go put it all in one country where it's cheapest?
Re-examining all the logistics, especially.
Absolutely. Logistics, which is part of supply chain management. So that is one example. Technology. Now, we all know that technological changes are going to continue. We always knew that before COVID and so on and so forth. We also knew that the rate of technological change is going to be not linear, it's going to be more exponential.
Exponential now.
But the past 12 months, that exponential change has been marked and enhanced. And you see the way people conduct business. You're not able to travel, so you do things through your online platforms.
We've become almost robot-like.
Well, I would say yes. There's been a higher level of dependence on various technological platforms, with like what you and I are doing now on this.
It's opened up the world. It's made the world much smaller.
Right. Yeah. Correct. The world will become much smaller. There will still be obviously a resurgence in business travel.
Yeah.
But companies are going to be very granular.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, really, is it necessary for you to go to a country X to have a face-to-face business meeting and incur the cost? Or can that be achieved through a virtual meeting, which is sensible?
Or like a business networking platform like Voices of ASEAN.
Absolutely right. I mean, that is exactly what I mean. And look, you are in Malaysia, I happen to be in UK, and we're having a very good conversation. And that's been streamed to, I suppose, many other countries and audience everywhere.
Yeah.
That is efficiency in my view.
Exactly. Global audience now.
Absolutely. And also in terms of how work is done. Don't forget, there was work at home requirements and so on and so forth. Now, there's going to be a carry forward of all that. So in the post-COVID environment, companies are not going to say everybody must come to the office and work in the office.
Yeah.
They will say X number of people who are not necessarily have to be in a physical office in the wherever they are, can work from home. And I can tell you, many people will opt for that because mothers, for example, might think it's easier for them to work from home and do equally well than tracking to the office and wasting time commuting and so on and so forth. And so then that'll be impact on demand for office space. Costs will come down for companies. And then the utilization of these buildings, don't forget, a lot of buildings have been constructed for office space. And then they will have to be redesigned, reconfigured. So I expect many buildings in the city will become mixed use. They could be converted from pure office blocks to some hotels, service apartments. There could be some shopping. and so on and so forth, retail. So
Yeah.
there'll be a lot of changes in the way the process of office management
Yeah.
and building management will sort of have to
But Dr.
morph.
Shegar, what do you think ASEAN can do as a group to enhance its attractiveness to trade and investments from the UAE? What business sectors do you see as having the most potential for growth?
Well, I can think really of a number of sectors. Maybe I can think of let's say five broad sectors. Okay, and I would say the first sector will have to be oil, gas
Mm.
related.
Okay.
Why? There's already an underlying relationship there, underlying relationship there. So that to build on that is not going to be very difficult. And that build or derivative from that relationship can take place in a number of areas. I talked about downstream activity.
Mm.
Downstream activity meaning investments in petroleum, petrochemical plants, investment in oil, logistics facilities, refineries. All right. Then, there's going to be a lot of energy requirements in ASEAN. ASEAN is going to grow at 5%, let's say, next year, which is very respectable. But energy requirements in ASEAN are going to be, in fact, if I remember correctly, second highest in the world after sub-Saharan Africa, African countries. And because all these countries in ASEAN are also very much developing their own economies, and there's so much more potential for further development too. So, and that means there'll be more scope for energy trade as well. There'll be more importation of oil products, so on and so forth, and gas. So, in terms of oil and gas industry, there's also engineering services. Many countries like Singapore and Malaysia have some very interesting companies in this sector. They provide a support service in the oil and gas sector, engineering, maintenance, and I think there will be opportunities there. And I've seen that in Singapore, and I've noticed companies like Rotary Engineering, for example, Consort Bunkers, several companies. Malaysia, there's a company called Jazz. They are all in this area, and they are doing in business in the Middle East in the engineering side. I think there's opportunities there on that sector. So that's one sector, okay, energy related. Then another interesting area really is in IT. And I've talked about IT already just now. That's certainly an area of greater engagement. I've come across a Malaysian company that's involved in making drones. And that company is, I know, very keen to do something in the UAE, and they've already established contact. And of course, there are many examples in Singapore as well. And don't forget, Indonesia is quite a well-recognized place for IT startups. Indonesia, a lot of people may not be aware of it. The IT startup space in Indonesia is extremely dynamic. And if you're an IT startup in Indonesia with a unique IT niche, frankly, you should very seriously thinking about the UAE as well, and bringing your niche into the UAE, and then in the broader region there. The third area would be renewables. Renewables is another area of development, because all countries in the world want to reduce their dependence on fossil oil. And that means renewables are going to be a key thing. Solar, particularly solar. The UAE, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai are massive into solar. Look, they've got oil and gas. They can be complacent and say, oh, we've got enough oil and gas, we don't have to worry about renewables. But on the contrary, you'll be surprised. They have a huge nuclear plant in Abu Dhabi. The massive solar plants in Abu Dhabi and Dubai are really massive. They're looking at green hydrogen. Now, hydrogen, as you know, is a big sort of area of research, clean energy. And
all
the
this
UAE
energy they're feeding into themselves. That means from the solar energy and from nuclear, it's internally, or do they provide to neighboring countries?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. At the moment, they are using that solar energy for themselves.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
But I can tell you there was one article I came across several years ago of this great plan in the future to produce so much solar. the sun is abundantly available in that part of the world.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Capacity, surplus capacity, and of course, you got to store it and export it to Europe through certain grids, that they want to establish. But that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But that's where your question about exporting solar energy comes into the picture. I mean,
because
you may have
very
read
central,
that.
right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. You may have read about Singapore doing a deal with Northern Territories of Australia. Again, it's not happen overnight, but Northern Territories has got a lot of capacity for solar energy in Australia.
Yeah.
So if they produce that and they do a line to transfer this energy through a cable to Singapore, that would be a cheap source of energy. It'll diversify energy in terms of Singapore's energy requirements. So yes, solar is renewables. So renewables is a big deal in the UAE. Masdar city is one of the world's most sort of green, energy efficient cities. And that's if you go to Abu Dhabi, I would recommend you visit Masdar city.
Masdar City.
And so renewables.
What's it called?
Yeah, Masdar City.
M-A-Z-D-A.
Masdar City.
Okay.
M-A-Z-D-A-R.
The car, Masdar. Okay.
Yeah, and DAR, and they it's worthwhile to visit because you can see how serious they are in committing money and resources to demonstrate that you could have an eco-friendly city, self-sufficient in energy production, zero carbon, and so on and so forth. So renewables, all right? Now, another area is halal food manufacturing and distribution. You have a large Muslim population in Malaysia and Indonesia. So halal food manufacturing, Singapore, Singapore, you'll be surprised, is also involved in halal food manufacturing and distribution. And it's a massive market in the UAE for halal food in the whole region, right? I mean, there is a thing called the Islamic economy.
Yeah.
And in the Islamic economy, there are 5 or 6 pillars, silos. The biggest is banking and finance.
Yeah.
In the banking and finance sector, Malaysia is number 1. Okay. Malaysia is huge in Islamic banking because the government has made it a point to make Malaysia the number 1 in Islamic finance banking. And the number 2 is UAE, by the way. Then you've got all these other pillars. You've got F&B, which is number 2. You've got fashion, travel, and so on and so forth. And the second biggest is in the Islamic economy, as far as pillars of the economy are concerned, Islamic economy is concerned, is F&B. And so I expect that is another sector of greater engagement. There's a company called Indoguna in Singapore. They have a huge halal food manufacturing plant in Dubai. Huge. And there are other companies in both in Malaysia, Singapore, also Indonesia, of course, who are constantly looking at exporting their halal products, food products. Some of them are pre-packed, some of them are ingredients, all kinds of things. And that is going to be a sector that I think there will be more engagement. And then the last sector, which I think is very important now, by the way, is the UAE government has said that they want to increase the contribution of manufacturing to the GDP of the country to reach 300 billion dirhams, all right, by 2030. And they have announced a program under the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology to make it attractive for companies from all over the world to set up manufacturing establishments or plants in the UAE. Now, don't forget, ASEAN is already a major manufacturing center. All right? Malaysia is, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam is becoming a huge place for manufacturing. Therefore, manufacturing companies should also look at this sector in the UAE, where there is a huge program to make it attractive for FDI in the manufacturing sector from overseas. And that would be the last sector I would really think offers tremendous scope for ASEAN companies.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, Dr. Shegar. So I have one last question for you. What's your message for those coming to GBF ASEAN in the 8th and 9th of December. So do you have any message for them? What do you think would be an expectation, especially when it comes to, your experiences? But what do you hope for GBF ASEAN too?
Okay, first of all, I must tell you, I think that the whole expo experience is a once in a lifetime experience. I've never been to an expo before.
Oh,
because it's
okay.
usually, it's not an easy thing to go to an expo. Usually it's crowded and so on and so forth, and you have to plan. And fortunately, I'm in a position where it is a natural sort of involvement that I have. So that whole experience of being part of the Expo 2020 in Dubai and the marvelous facilities that have been set up, the pavilions, country pavilions, and all the rest of it that comes. Every pavilion will have all kinds of programs, and then there are other programs that are held collectively in the main pavilion. So to go there and soak in the expo atmosphere is by itself a big plus. Of course, as I said, we're emerging out of COVID. This is the opportunity for businessmen to now go back to business as usual and talk about building business connectivity and rebuilding it and extending it. And by going to the expo and being a participant in the ASEAN Business Forum, etc., you are given the opportunity to do so, to network, to meet people. And this is something that is a great opportunity, to sort of bring business back on track.
Yeah.
And explore the opportunities for the region from that visit to the expo.
Yeah.
And I really think it's important because I see tremendous opportunity between ASEAN and GCC as we move forward. Don't forget the G2G relationship between the countries, very good.
Yeah.
The economic relationships, the business relationships are there, as I alluded to earlier on.
Yeah.
And it can only get better.
Yeah.
As both regions are committed to economic collaboration. And economic collaboration is going to be the modus operandi of the post COVID economy. So this forum can be a platform. It should foster long-term cooperation, greater connectivity. And I think they should have activities to follow up. You can't have just a forum and then forget about it.
Yeah.
There must be an agenda. I'm not an organizer, but I trust there will be an agenda afterwards to keep that engagement going.
Yeah.
Continuously.
Yeah.
Networking or business delegations or seminars, and that's on a B2B basis. But I also feel, and I'm convinced that this is the case, that the G2G facilitation is important.
Yeah.
Governments, fortunately in ASEAN, fortunately in the GCC, the governments play a great catalytic role. We as Business Council think we do the same too, but the governments are very important. They play a great catalytic role in encouraging B2B connectivity. And I think that will start again.
Yeah.
They have done it in the past. You have this COVID interruption, and that will come back.
Yeah.
And I think it will be enhanced.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to being there and also to meeting you. And good luck to all the participants who are watching, and wishing them a fantastically successful exhibition and expo. And thank you, Dr. Shegar, for being here and for being so gracious and answering all the questions so eloquently. So this coming Monday, 29 November at 9:30 a.m. Malaysian time, I'll be joined by a very special guest. He's none other than the longest serving Prime Minister in Malaysia's history, none other than the father of modern Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. And so see you there. Voice of ASEAN thanks you for your time. And we'll be uploading a recorded version of this dialogue in our portal for those who missed it. Thank you, everyone, and see you Monday.
Thank you to you,
Oh, thank you, Dr. Shegar.
all the efforts. Pleasure to be part of your Voices of ASEAN.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I'll get your number.